Today in the men's group fellowship, we pondered some universal questions. What is the difference between a desire and a need? What is pleasure? And what is pain? How is this connected to the sacral essence of our being? And I just had like all of these codes and these innate knowings flowing through me in this group of 90 men, just pondering these questions and feeling into the root of the energy. And I'm not here to offer any proclamations of absolute truth, but I just want to share what some of the codes that were coming through were. The first being that under every single desire is a need. And that need itself, while there are likely a plethora of emanations of a single need, that single and absolute need is union with the divine. There's the only need. Everything else is secondary. The desire and perhaps the need for breath, for sustenance, for food, these are to remain alive. And the need and the desire to remain alive is to feel the continuum of presence, which is God. To ensure that the continual thread of experiential consciousness remains so that God can be experienced through whatever lens it needs to be felt by. Any sexual desire is ultimately a need for wholeness, a need for union, a need for love. And God is love. And what was coming through earlier as we began to shift our questions toward the question of pleasure. Is pleasure wrong? Is pleasure something to be ashamed of? What is pleasure? And what came through is a few things. The first, pleasure is an innately coded mechanism for life to eternalize itself. The deep, incomprehensible pleasure of the orgasm that is ubiquitous within the animal kingdom, and perhaps the plant kingdom and other kingdoms and queendoms beyond. It is this ultimate pleasure that is coded into life so that life can reproduce itself and transcend its own death by way of its progeny. And thus, to sustain the ancestral stream which it contains, all by way of pleasure. And in a world where pleasure is something, especially sexual pleasure, is something which has been shamed and tamed and confined and contained, my deeply felt experience was that there is this universal pleasure which is present in all things as an emanation of God's love, which is omnipresent. What do I mean by this? Specifically, I was envisioning a field of flowers and the feeling that those flowers have in simply being alive. They just are like, yay, yay, I get to be. Sun, rain, wind, it feels so good to simply be. And the bees that go and pollinate the flowers, they're just like, I'm a little bee. Simply being. The trees, the sand, the mountains, the human beings, an infant, a baby. Just this peaceful contentment. Pleased with God and pleasing God, because God created all of these emanations of himself just so they can exist. And in the pondering of pleasure, the word pleasure, I felt called to trace the etymology of the word. And I did with the dictionary, but what came out even more strongly is the phonetic attunement between the word pleasure and the word placenta, and likely an etymological root shared between those words. And the placenta is the substratum within the womb, which holds and feeds and nourishes the child, which is still in the mother's womb. And so I thought of pleasure as the substratum of God's love, which nourishes and feeds all things. That is what pleasure is. And then there can be something of a discernment between true pleasure and illusory pleasure. Pleasure that is truly rooted in closeness and proximity to God and union with God. And then false pleasures, which are like this numbing, purely sensory or impurely sensory clinging to fleeting, ephemeral instantiations of mimicries of God's love, which do not actually contain the eternality of that love. And that weaves into the question of pleasure and pain, wherein it felt very strongly like pain is samsara, while pleasure is nirvana. And that which essentially distinguishes the two is the attachment to the pleasure or to the pain. And somewhat ironically or oxymoronically, nirvana, the eternal and absolute and ultimate pleasure of God's absolute, infinite, loving eternity, is only attained by detaching oneself from any kind of illusory pleasure which the world will try to present to us by way of Maya. What do I mean by this? What I mean is that the pleasure that is derived from any external emanation of being, the pleasure that I derive from witnessing a flower coming into bloom, if I attach myself externally and create some kind of need or desire to attach myself to that in order to feel union with the divine and the God and the divinity that is contained within my heart, within my being and within my soul, then that externalization is itself the attachment, which then inevitably creates the pain of samsara. Thus, the breeding grounds for needs the absolute need and necessity for all things to be connected with God. Within the realm of misalignments, distortions, separation, in which we live in some sense. This need sprouts into desires. When we have forgotten our innate connection with the divine, when we have forgotten that nirvana is here and now in every single moment eternally, And God's eternity is eternally contained and omnipresent within all things. When we forget these truths, and when we have convinced and psyoped ourselves into forgetting these feelings innately within our body, that's when we created all of these desires to reach for fleeting sand, which only slips through our fingertips. To pick a flower, thinking, oh wow, look at this beautiful, lively, alive thing, and then it only withers in our hands. So that what came through then was what is necessary is eternal, whereas what is to be desired is always fleeting. Well, perhaps the desire itself is fleeting, whereas the necessity itself is eternal. The necessity is what subsists throughout eternity, in spite of all of the changes. Which God's emanations must experience. Must being a necessity. So, I'm entering the realm of playful mind here. But I'd like to return to the realm of feeling. Because I am truly speaking of a felt experience. During the call, there was a lot of discussion and like almost this mind energy of like a desire is this and need is that, and this is the truth and this is my proclamation, and oh, what you said, not quite right. Well, no, this is right, this is wrong. Like the mind likes to create these separations, but here I shifted myself out of that and out of trying to like intellectualize and understand, and suddenly I just felt it, and I was just like, yes, 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 I am, I feel, this is it. This being something which cannot be put into words. I feel the pleasure of the need being met of feeling God's presence within the present moment, and that being the only need. All else simply emanations of that need. The need for breath, the need for God's breath. The need for water, the need for the waters of God. The need for life, the need to feel God living through me. The need for love, the need to feel God's love within. In case my phone wants to die, I'll say that I've ended the video here. So, if this is the end, blessed be you. But if it's not the end, it's a continuation. And the continuation is in pondering the fact that we souls, we soulful embodiments of being, are here in these animal human bodies, in these temples, with these energy centers, in these waves. And here we have our sacral centers, our sexual organs. And in this question of desire and necessity and pleasure and pain and all the questions that are tied to these things, I, as a man, am faced with the question of the seminal fluid and the seminal essence, energetic of life, which I contain within my body. Whose liquid, fluid, essence, energetic and somatic, contains within it the essence of my entire ancestry and the entire past that is contained within that, as well as my entire progeny. There are thousands of human beings contained within my semen. Thousands of souls dormant within a realm of potentiality. And in some sense, I am responsible for them. I hold them as my great-grandparents and my great-grandchildren, or even as my parents and my children, and as myself. So, how do I want to relate to that innately coded pleasure of the orgasmic essence of my being, which itself has the power to create life? How do I want to relate to that essence, which itself is an emanation of my soul, and even an emanation of God, God's breath, God's desire for life to beget life? Do I want to be ashamed about it? Do I want to be energetically enmeshing that substance of my being with inverted systems of sexual enslavement, pollution, torture, and imprisonment? You know exactly what I'm referring to. Do I want to feed this life essence to patterns of distortion and abuse and rippling telescopic mirrors of that shame? And where does that shame come from? And where does all this desire to contain and to suppress this infinite life force, where does that come from? Parenthetical questions. Or do I want to learn to nourish and nurture and love that loving, vivacious element of my being? Can I cultivate within my being, as so without, a reverential relationship with this energy, so that it might bring me closer to God, which is the ultimate need. And if I want to cultivate such a relationship of reverence, then what does that look like? What does that look like, on one hand, in the sexual realms, but also, on the other hand, in the sensuous realms of being, in the sensuous experience of feeling the world, of feeling my way through reality, of feeling my way through this animal body, of feeling the waves of the ocean caressing my skin when I immerse myself in the waters and the wombs of life, when I immerse myself in the ever-present placenta of the motherly womb of the goddess which wraps herself around me to sustain my being on behalf of God. When I feel my fingertips caressing the bark of a tree and a forest, and I feel the entire forest herself holding me beneath my feet. When I feel my breaths entering and nourishing my body, and I offer my breath in return, in infinite reciprocity. How do I develop a relationship to this sensuous experience of being, which right now is ephemeral, but contains the breath of eternity within it, which is my soul, which is the gift of life which God has bestowed upon all creation? How do I transmute eons of repression and imprisonment and pain and trauma and wounds? How do I transmute all of that into deeper presence, reverence, and felt experience of love? All of this sand. Really wishing to be present in this transmission. For the sand in the hourglass reminds us that all of these pleasures, though they come from eternity, they're fleeting. So how do you want to relate to a fleeting world? And how can you receive this world and give to this world? To bring you closer to eternity. God. And how can you turn the sensuous experience of the fleeting sands to a witnessing of God's presence in every grain. These are questions which are as alive as they are universal within my microcosmic being, and which I pose to you as much as I pose to myself. And my challenge to myself and to you is not to intellectualize and rationalize an answer to these questions, but to feel the answer, and to live the answer, and to embody the answer, and to find that whatever answer you choose, hopefully, it will guide you to freedom. Yeah. My gratitude to the fellowship for the sacred container of healing. My gratitude to the sand for holding me as I spoke these words. And my gratitude to you for listening and witnessing. I'm now going to go write some poetry. Much love and blessings to you.